Hi, I'm Jeffrey Sweet. In my last video, I introduced the subject of characters at war with themselves by talking about characters whose personal drives are in conflict with their professional ethics. And I talked about how you could find some stories by creating people who are tempted to violate their professional ethics because of overwhelming personal drives. But this time I want to talk about another way of finding stories about characters at war with themselves. And I call this appetite versus responsibility. And I want to introduce this by talking about some of my favorite of Shakespeare's work. About my favorite chunk of Shakespeare is the history cycle that goes from Richard II to Henry V, particularly the middle two plays, Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2. And I see these plays being about the formation of character, specifically the character of Hal. There's a popular children's book called Heather Has Two Mommies, which is about a girl whose biological mother has a female partner. Well, you might call Henry IV's story, Hal Has Two Daddies. Though, unlike the book about Heather, Hal's two father figures are not romantic partners. Anyway, one of Hal's fathers is, of course, his biological father, the king, Henry IV. He is all guilt and responsibility. Everything is about what one should do or shouldn't do. I don't know if anywhere in the three plays in which he appears he ever smiles or cracks a joke. He's not a warm, cuddly figure. He's always reminding Hal about what duty is and how he should comport himself. And he has reason to give Hal grief about how he comports himself because Hal is kind of a hellraiser. He likes to go drinking and carousing, and he likes to go drinking and carousing with his other father figure, who is a character who is perpetually determined to lead him astray in the name of fun and good fellowship. Falstaff, he's all appetite and impulse. Falstaff loves to drink, he steals, he cheats, he consorts with hookers at the Boar's Head Inn, and he absolutely adores this kid who happens to be the Prince of Wales. He goes so far to call him my sweet boy and my heart. So if you have a superficial acquaintance with the theories of Sigmund Freud, you might notice how Henry IV and Falstaff are human embodiments of aspects of his theory about the components of a person's mind. Henry IV is the personification of the superego, the conscience. Falstaff is the personification of the id, appetite and impulse. You may remember a similar construct in old cartoons. There's one old wartime short, a cartoon that was made during World War II, called Donald's Decision, in which Donald Duck is torn between an angelic projection of his character advising him to buy war bonds, support the troops, and a demonic projection of himself urging him to splurge, spend his money on luxuries and pleasures. The angel has a halo. The demon has horns, and they get into battle over Donald's soul. Now, of course, not all appetite is an expression of evil, and not all responsibility is an expression of virtue. But this it was a pretty common construct in cartoons when you had characters who were faced at a crossroad. You know, angel on one shoulder, devil on the other. Anyway, getting back to Shakespeare. As I say, Hal has two fathers, and he metaphorically kills both of them. When Henry IV is lying on his bed, gravely ill, Hal picks up his father's crown to try it on. His father wakes up and says, "Oh, you couldn't wait, huh?" And this segues into a scene in which they finally reconcile. They finally understand each other and express their affection for each other. It also includes a passage in which Henry IV, with his dying breath, is giving Hal a lot of good advice about how to be king. But by picking up that crown earlier, Hal has metaphorically killed his father. Later, when he is the newly crowned king, his old pal Falstaff comes rushing to him in public and declares his love. You know, Hal, now Henry V, looks at him coldly and says, "I know thee not, old man." He has to do this in order to command respect. The new king has to publicly signal that he is turning away from his past as a juvenile delinquent and create a new image of responsibility and integrity. But of course this devastates Falstaff, who essentially dies of a broken heart. Having killed both of his fathers, Hal then assimilates qualities of both of them. And what is interesting to me about Henry V, the sequel to the Henry IVs, is that it shows the young king faced with a series of challenges, and the suspense from scene to scene lies in our wondering which father's example he is going to emulate facing which challenge. He certainly emulates Henry IV in how he deals with traitors. He even has to agree to allow the execution of an old friend of his, Bardolph, when it turns out that Bardolph has been arrested for pillaging a church. Something that Hal said, you know, if you do this, you're going to get hung. You're going to get executed. Bardolph does this. Hal has to make good on his word that this is stuff he punishes. Later on, certainly it is the playful side of Falstaff who informs Hal's courtship of the French princess. It's filled with jokes, the kind of wordplay that Falstaff would indulge in. Certainly nothing that Henry IV would have done. All right. Now, yes, this construct of appetite versus responsibility can overlap the professional versus personal construct that I discussed the last time. But ethics and moral injunctions come into play in non-professional situations too. Medea isn't punching a time clock, but she is a mother who loves her children. But during the course of the play that Euripides wrote about her, Medea discovers that there is something stronger than her responsibility and love for her children, and that is her hatred of Jason, and this leads her to murder her own children. One of the interesting things about coming of age in the 1960s is that this whole issue of appetite versus responsibility ended up being charged with new values. The idea of responsibility became very unpopular in certain corners. It was suggested that responsibility basically meant caving into authority that was often based in corrupt conservative constructs. And a lot of self-anointed gurus held that ignoring your impulses was to turn your back on your authentic self. And you then had the ironic spectacle of people being guilted, if I can use that as a verb, guilted into behaving impulsively by invoking the superego word should. Some people were conned into believing that they should obey their urges. So, you should try that drug to expand your consciousness, or you should betray your friend by hitting on their spouse. You have that urge. Or you should say, fuck you to your boss and jump into your convertible and join a band of merry pranksters. I saw a lot of people who were sort of bullied into giving into kicking over the traces of their lives in order to be their authentic selves. Paul Mazursky made a few films satirizing this. He co-wrote I Love You, Alice B. Toklas, and co-wrote and directed Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and both of these were pretty much explicitly about this idea of people being tempted to turn away from conservative lifestyles in order to find what being authentic was. I don't know. Anyway, now it's true that some people fled their loyalties to corrupt institutions and found liberation and did wonderful things, made great art, led liberation movements. They did wonderful things. And then, there were other people who made wrecks of their lives. So I would guess that a lot of the people who obeyed certain impulses on January 6, 2021 in Washington, D.C. will be regretting embracing their authentic selves for a while in jail cells. Anyway, drama involves characters making choices, and conceiving a character torn between responsibility and appetite has the advantage of giving you a figure who will inevitably face a hard decision.